There will not be a vaccine by the end of this year, and probably won't be one for the first half of next year. Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Wise Medical Minute. We're going to do what I'll call today, What Should We Be Doing, Part 2. Now, if you haven't previously seen any of our videos, there's a Part 1 where we talk about the things that we should be doing to address this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the purpose of all these videos that have to do with COVID-19 is to reduce the anxiety and reduce the fear. And the best way to deal with any form of anxiety is with information. So I'm hoping by understanding things better and explaining the same things you hear but from a different perspective, that maybe we can reduce the anxiety that comes with the fear of this virus. Now, I made a point in a previous video that I urge you to take a look at, that I believe, and I still believe, that the anxiety and fear will kill more people than the virus. The virus is deadly. I don't mean to diminish the importance of respecting how potentially fatal it is. But as of last night on TV, they're telling us that we had 5 million cases of people confirmed to have been exposed to COVID-19. And as I've said many times before, who believes these numbers? But even at 5%, we're still looking at 1.5% of the population. So this hasn't affected everybody yet. I'll get back to the concept of affecting everybody before we conclude. But I wanted to also reflect upon the things we've already talked about in passing. We talked about when people want to get on with their lives. We talked about school. We talked about dating. So please check those previous recordings and you'll see some of the more detailed explanations of what we should be doing. Now, as for the mask idea, I want to start with making a nice, hopefully, explanation for how I wouldn't make masks mandatory. It's just like helmets on motorcycles, okay? I think anyone who doesn't wear a helmet when they ride a motorcycle is not very intelligent. But the other side of that coin is we need a source of organs for donation. So when people don't wear their helmet, we don't want their brain, but when they get into an accident, we could certainly use their kidneys, we can use their liver, we can use lots of their organs. So I wouldn't mandate helmets because we need sources of organs for donor. Similarly, we're never going to get over this pandemic until we have adequate herd immunity. Now, we got a question about that, so let's talk about herd immunity. Herd immunity is when a lot of people in the population have been exposed and are no longer susceptible to getting sick from exposure. That's a quick summary. Now, all these folks who refuse to wear masks, they're going to contribute to the herd immunity because they will get infected. Similarly, they're also going to spread it to other people. So eventually, either thanks to a vaccine or thanks to the folks who refuse to wear a mask, we're going to eventually have herd immunity and this pandemic might go away. It might take years. But the bottom line is, I believe in natural selection, and those folks who refuse to wear a mask, are going to go the way of a whole lot of other extinct organisms that have come along historically over the millennia. So I believe the masks do play a role, and I want to spend a little more time explaining what that role is. We've discussed this in previous recordings, but in the context of talking about travel, I want to get back to the role of the mask. Now, we have to understand, as we mentioned before, there's 3 different kinds of testing, okay? Now, wearing a mask is important regardless of what your test results were. in part because we can't be as confident about knowing when somebody is infectious as we can with the knowledge that they have been exposed. The readily available antibody testing that we do right here at Wise Medical Center will tell people, yes, you've been exposed, or no, you have not been exposed. Simultaneously, we can tell you that it was recent or possibly remote, as we do the IgG and IgM testing. I won't bore you with those details. We went over that in a previous recording. But the truth is, what we lack is a test that allows us to say, yes, it's safe for you to return to work. So until we have adequate testing, and you already know how I feel about why we don't have adequate testing, but until we have adequate testing, we have to go by symptoms as far as when people can return to work. Now, returning to work after you've been exposed is based on whether you have symptoms or not, or just based on a quarantine period of an arbitrary number of 14 days. Now, when you are ill with symptoms, as your symptoms subside, there is a period of time when you have a fever, the fever goes away. When your fever goes away and the remaining symptoms have gone, then you can start counting the days. 10 days after you no longer have symptoms and you've not had a fever without any Tylenol or whatever to reduce your fever, it's probably safe for you to return to work. Unfortunately, the best way to determine that you're not infectious is not always readily available. There's PCR testing, which tests for the viral proteins and viral genetic material, is the best way to go. So if you're lucky enough to get somewhere you could get that kind of testing, obviously when that test is negative, it's safe for you to return to work. So we do want to push the multiple forms of testing as one of the things we should all be doing a lot more of. Similarly, in the same context, if we're going to talk about going back to school, we're going to talk about resuming sports, we're going to talk about dating, we're going to talk about any of the things where people must come together, church, whatever. Testing is a critical part of knowing the status of the people that you're meeting with. So with the soon to be available antigen testing, we can answer the question about whether or not you're infectious. We've been in communication with the people at McKesson who, in collaboration with the people at Quidel, will be making antigen testing available to small guys like me. Right now, this test is only available to big hospitals and health departments and such, but we'll be able to have the antigen testing, which will tell folks, yes, it's safe for you to return to work. I've been promised by October. So what we should be doing in that regard is being aware that the testing makes a difference. It's nice to know you haven't been exposed. It's nice to know if you have been exposed, whether it was recent or not. And pretty soon we'll be able to answer the question whether or not you are infectious if you have been exposed. So we'll do as much or as little as we need to do that in upcoming videos. Now let's talk about travel. The reason I brought up masks, and this is in part for my own family, they're going to be upset because I got to get on an airplane sometime soon. But I was pleased to learn that as recently as July 20th, 2020, Delta Airlines, based right here in Atlanta, came up with what I think is a pretty comprehensive plan to make it safe to return to air travel. If ever you're going to wear a mask, it's got to be on an airplane. Similarly, it's helpful and reassuring to know the things that have been done to make air travel safe. Now, I haven't really looked at other airlines. I'm assuming they're going to emulate what I've seen Delta has done. I don't have any stock in Delta. But if you look at their website, the things they're doing, I think, should provide enough peace of mind that we should be able to resume air travel in the very near future. In addition to blocking off those middle seats, they're spending a little more time with air filters in the plane. And I learned something about the air quality in an airplane is probably better than almost any other buildings that we see the general public occupying. Half the air is brought in by way of these engines, and those engines reach temperatures of like 450 odd degrees. Not too many viruses can survive that temperature. And then it's compressed, and the compression is at very high levels in terms of pounds per square inch. I wrote the numbers down somewhere. Like 450 pounds per square inch. That compression in the wake of that heat is going to kill a lot more than viruses. Similarly, the ventilation on an airplane turns over every 3 to 4 minutes. And a typical air conditioner that's working properly in a normal residential or commercial building, the air turnover is more than 12 minutes sometimes. So just the idea of frequently turning over the air in the plane is going to help with the reduction of likelihood of catching a virus. Now, the different kinds of masks are worth talking about in the context of travel. Basic purpose of a mask is to keep you from giving somebody else your germs, okay? Give us a false sense of security when you're just using a cloth facial covering, and you're not going to be invincible. You're still susceptible to getting the virus. However, the so-called N95 masks will eliminate up to 95% of particles larger than 5 microns. Now that's about plenty small enough to get most viruses. So the N95 masks are not always available, but you need to find one if you're going to get on an airplane or if you're going to be in other close quarters. I think it's less critical on an airplane than places like an elevator or public transportation or anywhere you're having to be in a crowd of people, protests, wherever. If you're in a large crowd of people, I think it's worth it to invest in the so-called N95 masks. Now, we have a question that came up about facial hair and masks. Now, the N95 mask doesn't work properly if you have facial hair. That's worthy of note. If you were to really seriously be like a healthcare professional taking care of sick people who are known to have COVID-19, you need to remove your facial hair and make sure your mask is fitting properly. And in those contexts, you also want to wear a shield and or goggles, and all the modes of transmission will pretty much be prevented. Now, back to the airplane. I kind of got off track here. The other thing that's reassuring about the airplane that is applicable to anywhere we're going to be meeting with each other is those little overhead jets that they have in an airplane. If you're going to be on an airplane, open that sucker wide up all the way, and that blows whatever particles are in the air to the floor. And if nothing else, it enhances the turnover of the air in the room, and you don't have as much opportunity for exposure to the virus. And that leads into the same thing we should be doing anywhere we're in a public place. Leave some windows open, open some doors, use fans. Anything that keeps the air moving is going to reduce the exposure. So that's equally applicable in a lot of settings. I've seen a few restaurants recently where they leave a door open or two and a window open or two, and they always have fans going. So those are just common sense things that have been scientifically proven to make a difference. Now, the other thing about travel, it's probably safer to, and I hate this idea, but if you were going to take a long trip, it's probably better to take multiple shorter trips. Long, prolonged exposure is riskier than if you get off the plane, get on another plane, have shorter exposure to different people. That's just a hypothetical that I think might justify some of the savings when you use connections. Another idea is the more you're close to people, the more you're going to be at risk. So get a first class seat. That reduces how many people are close to you. And similarly, I hope they keep their word when they say they're going to block off the middle seats when people confirm a reservation and claim a seat, because that gets you almost 5 feet of distance, at least 3, between you and the next person. So all of the things we've talked about with hand sanitizer, you can get portable stuff, carry it with you when you're on a flight. All the things we've talked about with regards to hand washing, all that still applies. I won't bore you with repeating all that. But the other point I want to make about the opportunity to learn some of these preventative, what should be universal precautions, that's a term they used many years ago, is we're not only preventing the coronavirus by exercising these policies and procedures, you're also reducing your exposure to other viruses and bacteria at the same time. So the common sense modalities are things we should be doing, not so much for the viruses we know about, but the things we don't know about. And I think that it's equally important to emphasize it for that purpose. So, in summary, I still hope that the ultimate result to get rid of this pandemic is going to be a vaccine. But in previous recordings, I forecast there will not be a vaccine by the end of this year, and probably won't be one for the first half of next year. At least not one that's available to everyone. But I'm hoping I'm wrong. Okay, I'd love to be proven wrong. That's why I'm going on the record saying that all these optimistic forecasts have more of a political basis than a scientific basis. And we don't want to be disappointed when they don't come around and produce. My other concern is a lot of the politically connected companies have already spent a lot of time and energy ramping up production of a product that we don't even know if it's going to be good or not. So I think we're going to have to be scrutinizing which vaccine and which company, because they've invested billions of dollars in ramping up the ability to produce. And even if the product's inferior, they're going to produce it and distribute it. So we need to be a little more cynical about which vaccine when they do come out, because we want one that's going to be effective. Now, the truth be told, none of these vaccines are going to be 100% effective. If it's 50% effective, if it's 70% effective, then that's going to be better than some of the flu vaccines. And on occasion, if we use that approach to get to the herd immunity, that means a large number of people are immune and won't catch the disease. Hopefully, we can do it that way rather than by people refusing to wear masks. But the herd immunity is going to be the key to ending this pandemic. And we are further down the road with regards to vaccines than we are with treatments. I haven't been as encouraged by the information coming out about the availability of treatments. Again, it's too laden with political overtones and undertones. But in summary, we want to get to the point of getting on with our lives. We have to not live in fear, but we have to use common sense and be safe about it. Thank you for your attention. I want to encourage your questions. That helps me a lot to let me know I'm addressing the things that people want to hear about. So if you have a suggestion or question that you want us to do in a future recording, info@wisemedicalcenter.com, and we'll include responses to your inquiry in a future recording. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for listening to the Wise Medical Minute with Dr. Thomas Locke. Dr. Locke addresses current events as well as important medical issues using responsible, unbiased journalism approached from a medical perspective. We invite you to submit questions or comments or suggestions for future topics by email to info@wisemedicalcenter.com. Again, thank you for viewing the Wise Medical Minute.